Welcome to the Survive, Scale, Soar podcast. Hear and learn through the success of others how to build the life and business you deserve. Learn to overcome failure, what it means to seek out growth, and how to become the best possible version of yourself. And now, here's your host, coach, entrepreneur, husband and father, and author of the #1 best-selling book, Survive, Scale, Soar, Jeremy Williams.
And welcome back to the Survive, Scale, Soar podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy. We have an amazing guest on today, Jay Papasan. He's an author. He's an executive with one of the largest, it is the largest real estate company in the world, a corporate speaker. He's got his hands on multiple businesses. He also works alongside his wife, Wendy, and they have a mega real estate team that has their expansion team. They're all across the country. So I'm really excited today. We're going to be talking about Jay's journey and what's gotten him to this place of success. So welcome, Jay.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jeremy. It's good to chat with you again. It's been a while.
It has been, and it's always good when I do get to chat with you. It's been amazing because I've been able to watch your journey, Wendy's journey, and just kind of watch that grow. And I think it's absolutely inspiring. And I know the people that are going to be tuning into this are going to be inspired as well, because you started out as just a guy that wrote books. Kind of tell me about that.
Well, I started out as a newsletter writer. Like I've always loved books, and I worked in publishing in New York. And when my wife and I relocated, we got married and relocated here to Austin. There was no big publishing for me to work in, so I ended up taking a job as a newsletter writer at Keller Williams Realty. And this is back in September of 2000. And there were only 6,700 agents in the whole company. And there were less than 30 employees. I think I was number 27 back then. So over the first couple of years, I bounced around because the company was growing. I got to help start a research department. I did some time on the support desk, helping people set up their websites, just, kind of like startup mode. What do we need? I'll do it. And then I found out Gary wanted to write books. And so starting in the summer of 2002, that's when we wrote The Millionaire Real Estate Agent. That became, and I still think it's my primary value proposition to Gary and Keller Williams. It's a world that I've lived in. Gary and I are great partners there, and we can create great long form material together. So we've become a little bit of a creative team, but the heart of that is in the book writing. And so that's where I started, and that's where I lived until, he asked me to step up and run KWU around our in-house university. I want to say that was around 2007. Okay. So I don't do you want me to go all the way to the present and I don't know exactly how far you want me to go down the path.
Yeah. Before we get to that, so the Millionaire Real Estate Agent book, a lot of people consider it the Bible of real estate. You go to it, it's really, I know my understanding is you're working on a second version, but it's the longevity it's had. There's nothing that's really changed a whole bunch. And it's the basis, the thing that people should start and build that foundation on to be able to grow. And it takes you all the way from being that individual agent to removing yourself essentially from the team and being the CEO. And so I think it's really cool. How do you go? You talk about writing long form. How do you go from the idea to that finished product? Where do you start?
Well, the first place, like Gary and I don't have a shortage of ideas. So there are lots of books that we could write. And then we usually go through a kind of an unofficial process to kind of declare what we should be writing next. So I have a feeling we'll both go to our grave with plenty of books that we never got around to. Because as you know, writing a book is very time intensive. It's a great, fulfilling thing to do, but it's very difficult. So we're fairly selective. And kind of the place we started when we started working together is I just interviewed him. And it would be kind of some of the same stuff that we did when we were trying to see if there was a product market fit in publishing when I worked at HarperCollins. But I asked him very clearly, what do you want the business outcome of this book to be? Because that's what we're working backwards from. And that means this advice doesn't apply if you're writing fiction or poetry, all of those things. Like if you are a business person who wants to write a book, that's where this might apply. So it starts off with what's the outcome we want for our business and be very clear. And if it's okay if you want to make money from it. Some people like, I want to change the world is always the answer. And I'm like, anything else? Because I guarantee you, if they lose a lot of money, they'll be upset. And the other one is like, what's the one thing, like before we even wrote that book, what's the one thing we want to change in either the reader's mindset, perspective, or actions?
So what was that one thing that y'all got it narrowed down to as far as writing that book? What was the biggest purpose of that book?
The business outcome was, at that time, Keller Williams was not fashionable or relevant for high production agents. So the business outcome was we hope to change the perception of the company for top producing agents. We were seen as a place for new agents to go and get educated. The top producers, well, they went to Coldwell Banker or they went to Remax or whatever. Yeah. So that was the business outcome. And we wanted to change the mindset of the reader, right? And there was some how-to behind it, but fundamentally, it's how do I transition from being a salesperson to a business person? And so a lot of people think it's a book about sales. It's actually about building a sales service business. And I've seen it adopted by all kinds of industries, from chiropractors, they're in sales, right? Because they have a service business they have to sell to have more clients, to car dealerships, you name it. Law firms have written back and said, I use this book. I've used it to build my business. But you have to transpose, instead of real estate splits, what does it look like when I bring on another chiropractor? What does it look like when I start a satellite office? So it's just the questions of growing and scaling a service business at its heart.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree with that. And I've heard the same thing over the years where people have used that book to grow their service business as well. And so let's fast forward. There were several other great books in there, the Millionaire, Real Estate Investor, and Flip, and a bunch of other things that took place. But you got to this place where I think it was almost like a passion project for you and Gary. And it was the one thing. What started that conversation?
That actually started when I was still, I think it was my second tour of duty in our education department. I had done 3 at different times. I've been called into action because I know how to do how-to content, right? And manage creatives. But we had just completed writing a course about lead generation. And it was this idea of time blocking for lead generation and building a business from wherever you were to, at that time, 36 units per year, which for us was kind of this place where, unless you're in a really, really low price point, you would be able to afford to hire your first help. So it was kind of like that, how do I build my production up and earn the right to start building my team? And that fundamentally was about lead gen. And so I'd worked with the team for, 5 or 6 months to do all the interviews and write the course. And then Gary wanted to write the introduction. And he took the course home for the weekend and he came back with an essay. It's like 14 pages called The Power of One. And we sat down that afternoon. Dave Jinks and I both read it. Dave Jinks was still alive then. And I turned to Gary and I said, when I read this, the first thing I thought was this could be a book. And he goes, I thought the same thing. So that's where it started. And we all know, like if you ask anybody in real estate, any coach in real estate, you say, what's your one thing? What is it for everybody in real estate?
It's lead gen.
Right. So this lead gen course kind of birthed this idea of the one thing. We started outlining it with Dave Jinks at that moment, but then the market shifted. Because if you remember, it started shifting. We saw it at the end of 2005. But by about 2007, we were headed towards a cliff. Mm-hmm. And I think Lehman Brothers was 2008.
Yep.
And I remember Gary, like as much as fun as we were having, exploring the one thing, we like, this will be our first broad business book. We all agreed together. I just remember the meeting. I said, I think our one thing right now is to help our agents and franchisees navigate what became the Great Recession. And so we were writing a book about focus. We allowed ourselves intentionally to get distracted by this other book called Shift. And we wrote that in about 6 months. And that went on to be its own bestseller. And then after that period, we went back to the writing table and published the one thing in 2013.
Yeah, I remember talking to you early on, and I think you even came out. We were one of the first places you presented when you came out to Houston, and we were talking about the book and the amount of research. I didn't realize the amount of time that was over. I didn't realize it was even pre-shift that y'all had started working on that book. And I think people have the misconception you can just sit down and write a book, in a short period of time.
It was about 4.5 years from start to finish for us to write and research the one thing. And
the amount of research that went into that. I remember you saying there were stacks and stacks of research. Not all of it could even go into the book,
Oh, a lot of it we couldn't. Yeah.
So, with the one thing, and, you're talking about the economy and the shift, back in the mid 2000s, probably we experienced it all the way through 2010, maybe even 11. And the market right now is a little different. It's a very interesting market. What do you think is the one thing that agents continue to need to do? And I think I know the answer to this.
Today, I think they need to work their core database. The more I study real estate businesses, the more P&Ls I look at and ask the question, where does your business come from? Repeat referral, right? The biggest teams to the smallest teams, it's going to be 50% or more. So it's always just number one, with very rare exceptions about where the business comes from. And so what we know is that's the foundation. It is the business that has the lowest cost of customer acquisition. Those are the easiest, conversions to make from lead to appointment to close, because they all have a certain level of familiarity. Either they know you and want to do business with you or refer business, or they're a repeat customer and they're coming back for more. And so managing that at a high level, I think, is always an agent's number one. Now, that's the universal. Are you talking about if we're going into a shifted market, I can walk you through shift, get your head on straight and go right to your expenses and get ahead of dropping revenue. That's a slightly different playbook, but you don't get to quit lead generating.
Yeah, I don't think it changes. And sometimes you've got to crank it up even just a tad bit more. Okay, so the one thing is work the core database. And one of the interesting things I found, I was reading a book that was talking about, the trends right now as far as the way people communicate. And, I think about 10 years ago in real estate, when you could do mass production emails and, a lot of the haven't mets, right? And you could capture some of those. And it feels like communication has really changed with the consumer. It's like they're harder to talk to because they're not picking up their phone. So you gotta change up your strategy. There's 15, 20 different social media platforms. Like, which ones are they on? And what are you seeing there in the way that people are communicating? Is it more communication or more attracting, or is it a combination of both?
I think that we always preach you want to be prospecting based and marketing enhanced. And I think agents should choose how they approach both prospecting, which is seeking business, and marketing, which is attracting it, based on what they're good at and what they enjoy. And because the things that they inherently get something out of and that they're good at, they're going to do more consistently and better. So I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question, because I don't think there's a universal answer.
Sure.
I think you have to find what you're willing to commit to. And for some people, it's like they're going to call their database 4 times a year. So I know some people that a big part of their Sphere program is going on social and interacting with people through DMs and stuff like that. And then the marketing, they can go back to that same Sphere or strangers and be marketing to them across those platforms. So that's probably not the answer you were looking for, but maybe ask it again and I'll see if I
Well,
can hear it differently. But I
no,
think
I
it's
think
so particular to the agent's strengths and choices about how they want to run their business.
and I think you hit it. And I think that's the beauty of real estate, right? Is there's 100 different ways to do it. You've got to pick one though, and you got to run with it.
Yeah,
be committed to it and enjoy it.
I think that consistency matters a lot. You know, showing up every day and doing even a little bit matters.
Yeah, I always say
that
consistency and being intentional, right?
Yeah. There's I think of it, one way to look at it is you're kind of creating energy in your business. And all of your outreach creates a certain amount of energy. And at a certain point, you start getting that back in the form of, I have a question or I have a real estate need, right? I remember during COVID, we were doing our care calls to our sphere. And Wendy stumbled on, my wife, Wendy's the salesperson, but I was doing it to my database too. But she's like, if you go into your keyboard settings on your phone, you know, when you type in TY, what does it do every time?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. You can create shortcuts for different scripted messages. So like I had one that was started with a comma and I would just write Jeremy. And then I would write, you know, no social 21. Like it was some string that I could easily type. And that would be, hey man, the world's crazy right now. How are you doing? I just wanted to check in on you. And I thought a text would be inobtrusive and respond whenever you feel like it. Yeah. But like could knock out like 50 of those, right? Really quickly, just working through my database because it's just like a name and a few letters. Mm-hmm. So it got personalized and then it got generic. And then you got to hit all these people. And then for the rest of the day, you're getting message energy back in return that some of that turned into meaningful conversations. Like I wasn't trying to recruit real estate. I've got a license, but that's not my job. I was doing another thing. I was checking in all the authors and writers in my world that I may want to work with or partner with or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a brilliant tip. If somebody takes that away today, I talk about it with my clients as using the text, auto text and starting the conversation, right? Or getting on Facebook and doing a DM, you know, starting 10 of those in the morning. And just as you go throughout the day, you're responding to them. They're responding to you. It really is true. It's the energy that you put out, you'll get back.
Yep.
So what is your favorite strategy in the one thing that you keep as an individual, you keep going back to?
Well, I mean, time blocking. I mean, I think it's where the rubber hits the road. It's identifying your one thing as a gift, right? Just knowing and figuring out kind of what your real priority is, whether it be for the day, the week, the month, the year, or your career, is a gift in itself. But then how you make it happen, you know, the simple act of making an appointment with yourself and then protecting that. And I've just gotten really good. And I've got lots and lots of systems around that for trying to protect it. And occasionally, you know, life happens and it all gets disrupted and you have to rebuild. I have to do that a few times. But generally, that's helped me be very persistent over a long period of time with some core habits that drive a lot of my success.
Very good. What's your biggest failure or challenge that you've had to overcome? What did you learn from that? And how's that served you well?
All of my biggest failures have involved people, right? I think that they hurt the most because if you make a bad hire and you have to fire someone later, and I'm using that, it's not like not everybody is a bad hire, right? I mean, sometimes you just hired wrong. Mm-hmm. But those are always the most painful for me. And so I've just been on a journey around succeeding through others. And that's made a lot of my world possible. I believe in it. I'm very committed to it. And helping others build wealth has been, you know, like that's part of the promise I make. You know, it's like if we go into business together, it's not going to be just Wendy and I winning. I want us both to win, and let's draw it out. And what does that look like? But I've just made mistakes. It's very hard to build lasting business relationships. Gary and I have been working together for 22 years. You know, it's 3 times longer than the average marriage.
Yeah.
And there's this thing called the 7-year itch, and it's really a 7 to 12 year, but people need something fundamentally to change. And like, I think of myself here, I've been here so long, I'm actually kind of on my third or fourth career. I just been able to have them all in the same, within the context of the same partnership.
Yeah.
And that's allowed me to keep a fresh view on my work and showing up, and the energy's good. So I don't know, like there just seems like there's an infinite amount for me to learn about how better to succeed through others. And all of my biggest mistakes are there. I just, again and again and again, every single year, I feel like I do a face plant at a higher level from a greater altitude. It's more painful, but I'm committed to learning. And I just don't think you get to live a big life without making big mistakes.
That's 100% true, and it's what you take and you learn from those and move forward with. That's so important. So one final question: you went from you got hired to write newsletters to where you are today. Could you imagine yourself in this position now when you took on that initial job?
No, you never can. I think that's actually a great question to reflect on. I remember it happened for Wendy and I a couple of years back. She was driving back from Houston. She taught a class there, and we were catching up, right? It was the time of day we normally would go for a walk with the dog. And she and I don't talk a lot on the phone because I'm not that social, but like we talk in person. And I was just catching up with her, waiting on her to get home. And a car in front of her threw up a rock and smashed her windshield. And I heard her scream, and I was like, oh my God, what happened? And she goes, oh, just my windshield's busted. We'll have to get it replaced. And we just went right back to the conversation. I said, I'm glad you're okay, whatever. And I remember she got home, and I was like, you remember it wasn't that long ago that a smashed windshield would have been not just a bad day, but like it would have been a bad week for us. We would have obsessed over it, how much it was going to cost, how much hassle it would be to get it repaired. And I think you just sometimes have to look back and appreciate how much we're all growing all the time. And that was just like a specific instance of that. But no, there's no way I could have envisioned I'd be managing that many people. I would have told you it was possible because I'm either optimistic that way or overly confident, right? I also know that I'm not meant to manage a lot of people. Like right now, I think I've got 44 employees under me and 11 direct reports. And that's too many, and it's temporary. And we lost an executive. I took over 6 new direct reports, and I want to make sure that they have an accountability partner and a sounding board, all of those things. But I also just know that ultimately what I've learned over those years is my biggest contributions are going to come from writing, or my ability to see solutions and communicate them simply. I just happen to love to do that through writing. I launched a new newsletter this year called the 20%er. That's been a passion project. I just, part of my growth this year was to force myself into a weekly deadline versus I can go years without writing a book. But this forced me into a rhythm of every week I had an obligation to put something out by 6 a.m. on a Friday. And my assistant was like, how did you know when to go? And I was like, I kept preparing to prepare, right? I delayed it a couple of months, but eventually I just said, I'm going to go and I'm going to make it work, and it's going to be painful and I'm going to make mistakes. But she goes, well, how do you do that? And I just said, I think about in 52 weeks when I'm looking back. After 52 repetitions of having to write an essay every single week, that's going to become very easy. And I'm going to look back at me today, just a year before, and laugh about how afraid and tense I was about that journey. And so that's why I'm doing it, because the sooner I start, the sooner I get through the awkward teenage years of whatever this new thing is and get to a place where you just don't realize that you've gotten stronger than you were before. And things that would have daunted you before don't daunt you anymore. That people just underestimate the power of that every single year in their lives.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And if you get anything out of this podcast episode, that was it right there. And
you saved it for the last question.
I know. I'd say the best for last. So I'm going to have to tell everybody, fast forward. Don't quit on me. So no, that's great advice. And, that's why I do the podcast. It's something to challenge me. I've got a deadline every Friday, 7 a.m. It better be going out, and it does. When you look back, it's amazing how much you learn. And, going back and talking about vision is we can have those visions. But I think it's always in the hindsight that we realize how much we've been blessed over that time. So
I'll say this, a lot of high achievers, they barely celebrate their victories, much less reflect on the journey to get there. And so I do think that there's an opportunity for all of us. Like if there was one thing I would tell them to do based on, like you like that statement, would be to sit down right now and ask, like, in the last month or the last year, like, where's an area that if I talked to myself before, they would be surprised about what I'm doing today? And there's always going to be something. It might be, I like raw tomatoes where I used to hate them, or right. It could be something really stupid, but we're growing creatures. That's the nature of being human. And, like I survived COVID, right? I survived having toddlers at home. Like you weren't sure about it then, but in hindsight, it's over and you did. I think we're a lot more resilient than we think, and we're growing more often than we imagine.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Jay, thank you for being on the show today. If somebody wants to reach out and connect with you or learn more about what you're doing or some of your passion projects, how do they do that?
Well, if they Google Jay Papasan, like I'm the only one in the world, I believe. So they'll find me in all like theonething.com. My newest project, which I'm proud of for real estate professionals, is the 20%er. And that's at the20%er.com. And it's a free newsletter. That's my journey. And I hope that, 52 volumes later, I'll have grown even more as a writer.
Yeah, I love that. I just read the Pebble in the Stream one. That was great. So
yay.
I appreciate you, Jay. And I know you're going to impact some lives today. And those that tune in the future, they're going to get some great information from this episode. That's going to not only help them in their business, but help them in their life. So thank you again, Jay.
Happy to be here.
Thank you for listening to the Survive, Scale, Soar podcast. If you heard something that made a difference in your life today, share it with someone that might benefit and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Learn more about the host of this podcast and coaching services offered by Red Hawk Coaching by visiting www.redhawkcoaching.com.